Hello, everyone. I'm glad to be here today. As a liberal arts college president, I feel like I should bring you greetings from the 19th century. But we have moved on, I'm proud to say, and that's really what I wanted to talk with you about today. One of the things that is fortunate from our point of view is we don't have to think about scale. We educate about 2% of the traditional four-year undergraduates in the U.S., and so when we think about our pedagogy and when we think about our systems and processes, we're not constrained by some of the things that we've talked about today. And so I wanted to talk about what we do and then how it would relate to our discussions of what artificial intelligence may do in the next 50 years. And so let's begin by thinking about something we haven't talked about today, and I'm a little bit surprised, and that's longevity. And I was actually thinking about this quite a bit before the AI upswing we've seen in recent years. I mean, I studied AI as a computer science major in the 80s, and there was a lot that needed to happen for us to get to today. And even back then, this trend was even more clear. And this is interesting. I talked to a lot of parents. And if you look at students today, and one of the most interesting widgets on the Social Security Administration website is an actuarial predictor. You just put in your birth date, and it's going to tell you the day you die. So if you look at the students coming in today, they're looking at about a 90-year lifespan with a 20% chance for a 100-year lifespan. So that means they're going to have careers that are significantly longer than the baby boom generation and X generation. In fact, they may be looking at 50-plus year careers. So interestingly, longevity is doubling the workforce even as the workforce is being stressed in other ways. So that's something to keep in mind, and it's certainly something that we talk to students about quite a lot. It's relatively inconceivable that an undergraduate major will be of much utility in 2070 as we envision it today. I mean, I think there's a lot that's going to go on in the meantime. So let's talk about that. So this generation is a little different. They're much more familiar with and comfortable with virtual systems and abstraction systems, things like Minecraft and very complicated strategy games like Dota. And they're also, used to using things like 3D printers, which take the abstract and the virtual and turn it into the physical. So if you think about learning by doing and sort of the John Dewey aspect of the term, it's an interesting prospect in that they've learned quite a lot in an environment that doesn't exist physically. But it's very much more akin to the environments that we work in every day in our work as intellectuals, certainly, but in any professional position. So in a sense, the millennials, so-called millennials, aren't any more millennial than someone born in the 17th century was an 18th centurion. They're much more creative, or they have the potential to be. And I think that creativity, as we've talked about today, is one of those things that has the potential to really be their shield against the effects of artificial intelligence and automation and the flexibility that's going to be required to work in that environment. So, this has certainly been observed quite routinely in the press, the idea of tinkering, the idea of essentially what we would call experiential learning, flowing into project-based learning. That's something that has become, pretty commonplace. We don't question it. We don't question the utility. The question is, how do we use it to the most effect? And so, from the standpoint of what we talked about today, engineering schools are probably in pretty good shape. I think we've made a fairly substantial argument that even with AI augmenting human capability, mathematics, or whatnot, that there's going to be a room for growth in the engineering fields. And interestingly, because physical trades, bricklaying, electrician, joinery, drywall, That's not something that robots are terrifically good at now or will be in any short time span. There's actually a massive trade crisis in the building arts. If you want to create about 1 million jobs, they're already there. You just need to learn how to do them. So, the government has begun to really make inroads in focusing workforce, moving people from unskilled laborer positions to more skilled positions, and they certainly exist. And then, as a liberal arts college president, I'm often put on the end of, well, I guess there's a loser, and the bad news, it's going to be us. I don't necessarily think that's true. I think that we, because we have the great opportunity to only focus on a small section of undergraduates, we have a lot of opportunity as well. But I think our opportunity is different. And so I come to my position here, unlike most college presidents. I was a technology entrepreneur early in my career. So I started and built companies in Seattle for about a decade. And as I was thinking about the longevity problem, which is in a way very akin to the AI problem when it comes to workforce, I wanted to think about how we might empower creativity. And I was thinking about it in the context of liberal arts colleges, but I think it applies to everything that we've talked about today. And I wanted to think about it in a way that was different from project-based learning and experiential learning, things that had become fairly routine. Even 20 years ago, we were talking about them. And my interest was in a much more student-driven, empowering creativity sort of way. So the idea being that creativity is not one of those things that's particularly easy to teach. You can teach innovation. I've taught entrepreneurship many times, but creativity is more of a thing that has to be empowered. It's more like growing a garden. You can provide the ingredients, but you have to let it grow. So at my alma mater, I essentially endowed this creativity fund, which would not only fund the work itself, but the mentoring and all the other things that would go along with it. And now about 5% of the living alums from my alma mater have been through these programs, and we'll begin studying their outcomes. But I think that what we've created is a rich area of study where we can look at, we know their career outcomes, and their career outcomes aren't tremendously different from those of other graduates from my alma mater, but in fact, what you can see even in the data that we've collected to date is the ability to be more flexible, to substantially change career directions and kind of retool along the way. So I have been working over the years with many liberal arts colleges looking at doing similar things. I'm just going to mention a few of them today because I think they're of interest if you want to take a look at them on your own, because they're doing things that are each in their ways unique. Oberlin, the conservatory at Oberlin, not the college, began a program in creativity and leadership about 10 years ago that I was involved in. And it's interesting when you go to a conservatory, just like going and getting a history degree, you're not likely to become a historian. You're not likely to become a professional musician. The likelihood is that you'll end up doing something else, at least for the majority of your career. So the idea was to encourage students in the conservatory and ultimately in the college to be very independent thinkers, to do these things on their own, and so to move beyond embodying this process in the curriculum to embodying it in the learning process itself. Middlebury does something very similar. They pull it out and do it in the summer, and the idea there is that you can facilitate these processes, you can facilitate creativity and leadership, but you really have to let them grow, and they create an environment to do that. And this isn't just happening, of course, at small liberal arts colleges. The College of Arts and Sciences at Lehigh has repurposed the Bethlehem Steel Research Lab up on South Mountain to do something very similar across a broad spectrum of undergraduates. And they are, I think, having some pretty good success with that. So the question then is, can you take these efforts that have been more peripheral and move them into the core? So make this process a part of the undergraduate experience for all students, and there are many that are doing this. I mentioned Hendricks and Allegheny. I could give you 50 more, but they've shown varying levels of success in being able to do this, and I think that ultimately the ones that are going to be successful in this sort of competitive educational environment will really master doing this, because creative inquiry is becoming as critical as critical inquiry. So we're actually moving beyond that to a model where it's much more generative. You can understand it, you can argue it, but then there's a generative component that comes beyond that. And, we have done a lot of thinking about majors and careers. This is for my particular college. We don't have that many majors, 14 of them, but you can see how they map to careers. This is for the last 40 years. When you start thinking about these very long-term careers with substantial changes along the way, you can only imagine that this gets quite a bit more complicated and nuanced. And I think that it's worth studying the variability in understanding how you would manage a workforce that is dealing with all these different pressures. Now, we've talked a lot about lifelong learning today. I thought, it's interesting to me that there are places like DePaul that look at this as an enrollment thing. It's just more access to our product. It's something that can be of institutional importance because it adds to our bottom line. And I don't disagree with that, and there's nothing wrong with it. But, we have struggled with where to put it and how it would work and who would be involved. And then, of course, web-based delivery. Moshe and I got to know each other when I was running connections at Rice, so I'm pretty familiar with web-based delivery. But as was noted earlier today, it doesn't matter what the delivery mechanism is. It's about the learner, not about the channel. And so I think we've got to understand that we have to build learners who are cumulative and flexible in their capabilities. And that's what, of course, we've been trying to do in these very individual programs, but it's going to have to be more a common practice amongst undergraduate programs in general. Because to throw people out who don't have these capabilities and say, well, you're going to have to learn them along the way, or the systems and processes are just going to get better and make the affordances easier, that's not necessarily a route for success. And then finally, we talk about alternate credentialing, and we've talked a lot about that as well, but it's not really about that. It's really about being able to transition people through different sets of skills and capabilities so that they can continue their career in any number of ways that we aren't likely to be able to predict. So, right now we have design schools, which have been mentioned, and we have business schools focused on innovation, and we have corporate innovation systems. I started my career working at Disney Imagineering and Hughes Research, both of which had their own innovation systems. So, it can commonly be taught, but, beyond just the design and innovation part of it, the pieces that are teachable, there's the infrastructure, the intellectual infrastructure underlying it that I think we have to focus on as a community, and we haven't necessarily been doing that. And then finally, my discipline is human-computer interaction, and my area of interest particularly is emotion and nonverbal behavior. So when I think about what AI could do over the next 30 or 40 years, I think about it from that perspective. We've talked about how it could subsume all these jobs through automation, but the coupling of humans and computers is the other end of that spectrum. And I would invite you to look at fMRIs of people doing creative tasks and also fMRIs of people dreaming, and you'll see that they're very similar. And so if we were to build neural interfaces that allowed us to tap into their dream life, which I don't think is inconceivable whatsoever, we're now then adding another 8 to 10 hours a day times the entire workforce of productivity. And does that do us good or not? And I'm not here to say either way. I think it's just adding more hours to this mix, but it's something to think about. So we know that things that can be solved through either deep network nuance or brute force are going to be done by machines. We are pretty optimistic that creative inquiry won't be subsumed in the same way. And the one thing I think that we can all agree on is it's going to require a highly adaptive and flexible workforce. And if we're thinking about this as educators, we can't get started on that too soon, because I don't know that we have been particularly good at focusing on that in the past. That's all I have to say. Thank you.